ambitious program. And I know we're going to have more people joining us as we go along, but I want to go ahead and get us started because we've given our speakers a massive territory to cover. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce these folks. We've got an awful lot of legal talent in the house. Hank Cox, distinguished criminal attorney and civil rights attorney. He's been chosen by his colleagues as president of the Jacksonville Bar and the Florida Bar. Welcome, Hank. Yep. Audrey has a staggering record of service to the community in a wide variety of ways. She served as a prosecutor, as an aide to 2 different Jacksonville mayors, as CEO of the Sulzbacher Center, and now Senior VP at Baptist Health for Social Responsibility and Community Advocacy. Welcome, Audrey. And Scott Carnes was an international lawyer for years before shifting gears down a little to less work and more mediation. His legal background is also wide and varied, and like our other 2 speakers, he's just weighed down with awards for excellence. Welcome, Scott. We've given them a ridiculously big assignment, and I can't wait to see it fulfilled. This began because these are the 3 people who stepped up to help the Duval school system get the half-cent sales tax on the ballot, even after the city had told them they couldn't hire a lawyer. I'm eager to hear your version of that and then move into where we stand now with that. We've also asked them to speak to the JEA blow up and the current referendum and restructuring, to talk about the status of the ex-felon voting right endless battle. And if we have time to get around to it, other ballot measures of note. So now I'm turning it over to the 3 of you, and I will be quiet.
Elizabeth, if I might take the privilege of beginning with the agreement of Audrey and Scott beforehand. It's a privilege, and we appreciate the opportunity to be asked to do this by you and Althea. Also, I don't know how much ground we will cover, but we would encourage people to ask questions in whatever format Elizabeth has created to do it. Scott and Audrey and I agreed ahead of time there are no rules for this. We're not bound by any rules. We aren't usually anyway. We respect each other. We often agree with each other, and you'll find out we often disagree with each other on a number of things. I do want to say, because there's an audience bigger than 5 right now, on the issue of Zoom meetings, that my favorite Zoom meeting was a few weeks ago. It was characterized as a Zoom margarita celebration on Sunday evening. It was myself and my wife. It was my good friend in Tallahassee and his wife, my friend in Palm Beach and his wife, and Paul McCartney and his wife. And it was one of the few Zoom events that was really remarkable. So, and you can't ask any questions why we were doing that. Let me go back to, and Scott and Audrey can correct me on the times, back at the beginning of the year when there had been a discussion, once again, of Duval County's dilapidated schools. When I say dilapidated, it's not just the physical structures, it's alarm systems, it's the water systems, it's the plumbing, it's the roofs, everything else. And what made it incredibly expensive to Duval County, and still is to this day until the problem's ultimately solved, is the monthly and annual maintenance expenses to keep up these schools, which were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and then annually in the millions. And most people didn't realize or don't realize that Duval County has the oldest schools in the state of Florida overall. So I was approached to see about possibly representing the school board because there was this identification of a certain amount of possible resistance within Jacksonville's government to putting on the referendum new tax. And of course, we all know that in Duval County, and I'm assuming we can editorialize to our heart's content tonight, that generally new taxes are designed to only go to the control of the mayor and the city council, which then puts the money in the hands of the sheriff's office for all monies. So this issue was important to the school board, and I will say ahead of time, they showed remarkable leadership in how they did it. So if you go back in time on being asked to help them out, as Scott Cairns knows, there were prior instances in the last several years in Jacksonville where Scott and the McGuire Woods firm, which is a national firm of great reputation, had been recruited. Foley & Lardner had been recruited. and the Gunster firm had been recruited. And it was usually Kevin Hyde at the Foley firm and David Wells at the Gunster firm. And we had teamed up at no expense to the city to represent the general counsel when she was under attack. We represented the mayor on the pension reform bill when that was under attack legally. So it was no new idea to put together a team to help the school board if that's what other people felt. And I will say that the first person I went to was Scott Cairns, and I'll let Scott talk about it in a moment. Scott's experience in the representation of school systems around the country, of school boards, of school superintendents was remarkable. And it was a natural person to turn to. Audrey was next. She was leaving Baptist Health as one of those big muckety mucks over there with probably a retirement benefit that would stagger all of us. And so Audrey was all for it. We couldn't recruit Foley and Lardner because they were representing the city already in a number of areas. And I will say about Gunster and David Wells that it wasn't long before we went to David Wells, as Scott remembers, that we said, David, we need somebody to step up and represent the Duval County teachers, because if it's unsafe for the students, it's equally unsafe for the teachers in these schools. And that's how it all began. Now, there are a laundry list of issues, and I'll turn it over to Scott and Audrey to talk about, but it all began, I think, it started coming to a head with a phrase that probably most people listening don't remember, and most people wouldn't relate to, is when somebody, a lawyer for the city, said the word shall meant may. And if the law said you shall do it, it really meant you may do it if you want to. So Scott, why don't you jump on?
Sure. Well, when the school board started this process and passed a resolution to have the half-cent put on the ballot, the process is that the school board has to request that a resolution go on the ballot. The statute says that if they request that the city council shall put it on the ballot. And then the citizens of Duval County get the opportunity to vote on whether or not they approve the half-cent tax in support of the school system. And initially, the school board wanted to get this on the ballot in November of 2019. There was as Hank says, there was an interpretation by the general counsel's office, which was surprising and prompted the three of us to get involved when they said that shall actually means may. And since this is an opportunity for us to give our opinions and hopefully not defame anybody, because all of what we say is opinions, there's a bit of conspiracy theory that can work into most of what we talk about today. And I think that the interpretation, my opinion is that the interpretation of the statute where shall means may gives the city council an opportunity to weigh in and accomplish things that perhaps the school board disagreed with. And one of the things here was getting funding for charter schools. And so the school board is willing to do some funding for charter schools, but this was designed to refurbish the physical plant of schools around the city of Jacksonville. And most charter schools don't own their facilities. And so there was a disagreement about how the money should be spent. And by interpreting this as shall means may, it allowed the city council to weigh in on this and express their view, and hopefully from their perspective to negotiate for funding for charter schools. And in their initial go round, the city council refused to put this on the ballot. And that's when the three of us really came in and said, you don't have the authority to not put this on the ballot, because this is a ministerial duty rather than one where you have discretion to put it on or not. And so we filed suit against the city in order to try and get this put on the ballot. And that prompted what in some ways was a subsidiary fight. Rather than going to the merits, the original response was that the school board didn't have the authority to hire its own counsel and didn't have the authority to sue the city. And so much of what we did initially was fighting that battle. And that goes, the analysis went back to the initial consolidation of the city of Jacksonville, or all the counties into the city of Jacksonville. And one of the things that was jumped right out to us was in the very first paragraph of the consolidation laws, it doesn't mention the school board. And so we got into some of the very nits of consolidation of this, but fortunately we were able to prevail on those initial motions and establish two very basic aspects of this. Number one, that the school board was entitled to hire their own counsel when there was adversity with the position of the city, and that the general counsel's office was adverse to the school board. And number two, that the school board could sue the city. And that was a very fundamental aspect of this. And once that was established, I think that laid the groundwork for trying to move this forward. At the same time, there was action in Tallahassee to support charter schools. And so there was, while all this was going on, there was a bill passed by the legislature providing for funding for the charter schools for any future referendum like this. So if this had gone on the ballot in November of 2019 as initially planned by the school board, then that law would not have applied. But various laws came into effect. Number one, that you couldn't put a referendum on any ballot other than when there was already an election going on. So that meant that this automatically got moved to November of 2020, which we're about to come up to, and that any funding of charter schools was already decided by the legislature. So that took that issue off the table, and I think facilitated suddenly everybody coming on board to support this. And you see every night right now, the mayor supporting the referendum and asking the people to approve this. That's a bit of a change from the beginning, but I think that's because
That's the most charitable thing I've heard you say, Scott.
That's because the polling is great.
Yes.
So he's in.
Yeah. I mean, that was one thing from the very beginning. All the polls that were done by UNF and others indicated that the citizens of Jacksonville were at about 75% in favor of this referendum. So the people of the city of Duval County were in favor of this from the very beginning. And it's just been a bit of a battle to get it to the point where we are right now, where next month we'll get to vote on this. And I'll turn it to Audrey to provide other responses.
So when I was leaving Baptist as this was beginning to unfold, and I can distinctly recall calling my friend Hank Cox and saying, I want in. I kept my Florida bar license. I'm still a member of the Florida bar. I want in. And I wanted in for a few reasons. One, I was horrified by an opinion from our general counsel's office saying that shall meant may. That is completely ridiculous. And the idea that we were going down a path where we're making up what words mean scared me for the future of our city. And so they graciously allowed me to join in. And I think my contribution, if I'm honest about it, was really a knowledge of city government from working for two mayors and a knowledge of politics and perhaps what was happening behind the scenes with some of the players. We have a lot of different motives were at work here. But I think one of the motives was this idea that the Duval County School Board members weren't quite as important as the city council members and the mayor's office. And so they were going to tell them what to do. And I found that outrageous. They're elected officials, just as the city council members are, and to disrespect their authority to request this be placed on the referendum. And as Scott said very clearly, it was a ministerial act. This is not something you could say no to. You needed to just put it on the ballot. But this idea that they were going to put their hands up and say, no, 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 we'll tell you when it's going to go on the ballot was outrageous to me, because unless the different parts of our government work according to the rules, we really do have chaos. And so that was my impetus for getting involved. That was my concern about what we were seeing and what was happening. I want to add too, that I think we were very, very fortunate for the case to be assigned to Judge Gary Wilkerson. This was, of course, a very high profile case, but in the several hour hearing we had before him, it was clear he had prepared himself for every eventuality. He had looked at the law, he had read the Constitution, he had read the charter, he had read the cases, and he came in guns blazing with a lot of really tough questions for the city. The other thing we'll just share, just as I'm sure what people want most is inside baseball. It was so funny to us, funny, not haha funny, but funny, awkward, that as we are demanding to be allowed to represent our clients, the Duval County School Board, after the general counsel's office was completely adverse to them and told our clients they were going to sue them for hiring us and threatened our bar licenses in the process, they themselves hired outside counsel, which they paid millions of dollars to represent them in this fight. So you could not even begin to outline the number of times that we just shook our heads and said, none of this makes any sense. What is going on?
And let me add a couple. And Scott, I wasn't joking when I said you were so diplomatic in how you described the whole process. Because, and I think it's fair for people to know, it was really ugly at times. I mean, ugly. Audrey mentioned the letter I got from the general counsel threatening different Florida bar violations if we proceeded with this. And then when the school board voted to hire us, then the really ugly correspondence came not only to us, but also to the school board for doing what they were doing. It was illegal. Scott will remember that when there were 6 of us who met at the Omni Hotel, I think it's called Juliet's Restaurant, for breakfast one morning. Scott, myself, and another person, and 3 people from the city. And they made clear to me personally, if you so much as think about getting that school board to sue the city, we will take it personally. I mean, that's how strongly they felt. Well, why did they feel so strongly about it? Because consolidation had existed, as Audrey said, for 50 years. And not once had any part of the city of Jacksonville ever been allowed to sue the city of Jacksonville under any circumstances. The idea was the general counsel's the lawyer for the city. They make all the decisions for all the departments, all the agencies, and every employee of the city. And therefore, they're all one entity, and no individual part of that can sue the city. Our argument was the school board has determined they want this on the ballot, and the city won't do what the law says they have to do. That's a conflict of interest between those 2 bodies. And that was the basis on which we pursued it. Scott mentioned charter schools. There were these undercurrents of absolute hostility if we pursued this from the charter school interests, because they thought they were going to get the short end of the stick the way the referendum would fund the school system, and they weren't going to get what they claimed they should be entitled to. Scott mentioned, if it weren't for people like Richard Corcoran in Tallahassee, who just march in lockstep with the charter school people, and they passed that legislation right at the tail end of this, the school board would have accomplished what they set out to do, because they didn't believe that the tax dollars of people in this community should go to pay some private building owner who's making rent, being paid rent by a charter school, that we're supposed to fix his buildings. Let the people who rent it pay to fix the buildings, but not the public. The public should rebuild their own schools. And the last thing I'll say, and Audrey calls it inside baseball. There were people who are well recognized, who came out of prior city government experience, who know what government in the sunshine means. And to suggest for them to go around and say, well, we ought to meet privately with city council members. We ought to meet privately with school board members. We ought to put them together and not notice the public that this is going on would have contravened everything about the public meeting law. And Audrey mentioned the city council. It was obvious that charter school had tremendous influence politically over city council members. And that was one of the problems we encountered. And I have never seen, well, I'm sure I've seen it plenty of times. The city council, to a large extent, decided they were the school board.
Mhm.
The general council told them what the law was. They didn't care what the law was. They wanted the school board to fund this little public school over there. I've always had a hang up about this baseball park over here. What the school board was concerned about was the overall improvement of the superstructure, whatever you want to call it, of the whole system. Not your little baseball stadium, not your gym, not because you want this at such and such a middle school. And that's what it became with the city council, at least to a great many of them. And then, as Audrey chuckled, when now we see Scott said, we see Mayor Curry doing these ads. We see John Delaney stepping up. Oh yeah, I'm gonna be on a panel to support this whole referendum. And my question is, where the hell were you people when it was really crunch time and we're trying to get this through the courts? No, you got to deal with the charter schools. You got to give them more money. You got to do this. So that may be a little harsher than Scott Cairns will ever describe it, but that's what we were dealing with. Right, Scott?
I've got a couple questions for you guys. One, I've had someone ask, what were you guys compensated for your representation?
Nothing.
Scott drew up the payment plan, the fees, but tell them what you did, Scott.
Yeah, well, in some litigation, there is the opportunity to recover your fees if you're successful from the other side. And so we made the decision that in our retainer letter, we would indicate that we would charge the school board for the work that we did at the same rate that the school board would pay if the general counsel's office had represented them. But you may not know this, but when the general counsel represents the school board has to pay for that. Now it's a lot less than Hank or Audrey or I would normally charge, but it's something. And so we initially agreed that we would charge that rate, which is like $100 an hour or something. But at the end of the day, when things were getting resolved, we decided that the best thing to do was to not charge anything. And so we wrote off our fees. But if anybody was familiar with that initial agreement, you'll see that we did have an understanding with the school board that they would pay us the same as that they would have paid had the general counsel's office represented them. But at the end, we didn't charge anything.
And Scott, I think it's fair that we point out that the Gunster firm, which is a big firm, agreed to do precisely the same thing for the teachers union and not charge them anything.
Wow.
So nobody got charged on our side of the table. And I can't remember, Audrey, how much the city paid for that losing effort on the other side.
Well, it was, I believe, close to $1 million.
Yeah.
Well, one thing we should mention that there were other players in this, as we've already commented, the teachers union got involved, and that was basically because we wanted a backstop in case there was a ruling that the school board couldn't sue, then we would have the teachers union there as a plaintiff. And they were represented by the Gunster firm, who, as Hank says, they didn't charge anything. And then we also had a number of parents who filed suit, and they were represented by Tad Delegal. And I don't know what their arrangements were, but I don't think there were any fees there. But everybody was working together for parents, the school board, and the teachers union. There were thorny legal issues about standing, whether or not various entities had the right to sue. Clearly, the school board did once we won that initial battle, but we brought everybody to the table who was interested in this to try and make sure that the issue got presented to the court.
Well,
And there were a lot of law firms who did a lot of work for nothing, so it was good.
and we're grateful to you all. One question I have, it sounds like it's critical that you got the understanding about the ability to sue, but I'm curious, once things started rolling the other way, did anyone ever sufficiently put some legal muscle into shall and may aren't the same thing? Or do we have that to look forward to the next time around?
I'll just say, then I'll let Audrey and Scott answer that. You know, we're a one newspaper town, so you got to live with the way they report things. But, you know, so we'll come to that issue in a few minutes. But be that as it may, they kept saying that we had approached the city with a proposal to settle this. That's not what was going on. We are the first case in the history of the city consolidated government to put a chink in the armor that they control every agency and department in the city from suing them. And we did it successfully in front of Judge Wilkinson. And then it went up on appeal, and you can't convince me that whole case got resolved because they were scared to death of what the appellate court was going to say and approve what Judge Wilkinson did. And then they thought their empire would crumble. It wouldn't, because all it did was apply to the school board, which, as Scott pointed out, wasn't even mentioned in the first part of the charter. But that's what they were afraid of. And I think, Audrey, you agree.
Yes.
That's why they settled that case and said, okay, city council, put it on a ballot, you know, just like $1 million later.
We
Yeah,
did brief,
Yeah. Go ahead.
we did brief the shall doesn't mean may issue for the court. We also briefed it for the general counsel's office before this ever started, and provided that information. We think our position is very strong on that issue. So as odd as it seems, the right to sue is really the big deal, because once we got past that, we felt very comfortable that we would have won on the initial issue, on the underlying issue of shall doesn't mean may.
I do think, Liz, it'll come again. The issue is going to rise again now.
Well, I can only assume fixing the physical plant is critical, but fixing the funding for the education going on inside it is going to come up.
One reason why this might not come back up again is I think Duval County there might be one other county in all of Florida that doesn't have this half-cent sales tax in place already. So once we've got it, this issue may never come back up again in this context.
And let me add one other thing about inside baseball, which Audrey talked about. One of the great things she brought to the table. Don't misunderstand. I'm not against charter schools. I mean, I do have 3 children who went all the way through the public school system in Duval County, and I'm fiercely loyal to the Duval County public school system. But we had serious discussions with Gary Chartrand and the charter school people to see if we could resolve this. And Audrey remembers those well and got other people. I mean, she was dealing, I can't remember the names of the people, but they were totally upfront in dealing with us. It was behind the scenes stuff that was driving us crazy. And
Right.
so.
Any other questions to do with the school board measure? Not seeing any.
Well, let me just say, while we were involved in the legal issues rather than the substantive issue of whether or not this funding mechanism is important to the school boards, I think all 3 of us would say that this is very important to Duval County that this pass when it comes up. It would be a major black eye if the citizens of Duval County didn't pass this, given the state of our schools.
I absolutely agree, Scott. And the idea that we would have the oldest physical infrastructure for children in the state of Florida should be an embarrassment to everyone who lives here. And when we send children to school in places that are dilapidated, unsafe, unhealthy, we're telling kids education isn't important. That's the message that we're sending. And the idea that we are finally in a position to invest in something that is critically important to the future of our city is something that can't be stressed greatly enough. The other piece of this is, if we look at the macro picture, so we're working on, I mentioned earlier that I wanted to get involved because I think it's really important that government operate in a way that is transparent and predictable and follows the rules. And we have been a city for far too long that has decided that any kind of tax, no matter what it's for, is bad. And that anyone who tries to say that we should invest in ourselves as a community is awful. And we have got to start thinking like other communities around the country about investing in our future. And this is a first step in that. And I hope it helps change the culture of, if you ever think that we should ever invest in ourselves, well, then you're just crazy and you don't need to be either an elected official or a person of any influence. So hopefully, and that's why I'm happy to see Lenny Curry saying, I'm supporting the half-cent tax. That's helpful. And hopefully we can change that culture.
Two late breaking questions. One person wants to know what percentage of the tax is now going to end up allocated to charter schools.
I got to try to remember, Audrey, it's a lot. It's a big chunk of it.
As I recall, it's a per capita allocation.
Oh, it's per
So-
pupil. Per pupil allocation.
Per pupil. So
Oh, God.
if
to make-
the charter schools have 20% of the pupils, they get 20% of the money, something like that.
Right.
And it is a formula and it is mandated. It is a loss of local control for us
Yeah.
because it is state mandated.
And that bill was hanging out there to the very end of the legislative session.
Yes.
People not sure whether it was going to pass. And I mentioned Corcoran, but it was right to the end, and everybody knew they had to pass it if they wanted to save the charter school money in Duval County.
Mhm.
The legislature had to step in and bail the charter schools out of this town. And that's what they did.
Another somewhat related question in this arena, also the legislature's effort to help us by making the superintendent an elected position did fail, but is likely to rise again. Thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I can't imagine electing a superintendent. The idea that you run a school system of 118,000 children with a politician is just beyond me. That whoever can get the most votes decides how best to run these schools, the physical plants, the teachers, the curriculum, I just can't imagine that. So, I mean, I can't remember who our legislative person is who brought that nonsense up. Scott, Audrey?
Jason Fisher.
Jason Fisher. Where is this coming from?
Something that's indicative of this, I don't think there's a single large school system in the country that has elected superintendents. It's just too, it's a position that requires a level of expertise that you're not going to find in a politician. It's not a politician's job. It's a person who's familiar with running school systems job.
Yeah.
And I think the accountability comes from the elected school board.
Yeah.
Right.
I know, Audrey, you've spoken to this, but our last question in this arena is, what do you think of the commercial Mayor Curry is running now in favor of the half-cent school tax? You're on record as thinking he might be changing the culture, but.
Well, I mean, I will say that it's, a little hard to swallow when we know he was working behind the scenes. But I've been in politics long enough to know you try to look at the bigger picture. And I do want the half cent to pass. And there are many, many people in our city who will vote for it because he says to.
Mm-hmm.
And, I do hope it moves the culture. But if I'm honest, I will tell you the first time I saw it, I shook my head.
I have an autographed photograph of Mayor Curry signing the bill for this. Now, we don't need to get into why I have it, but I just got
Want to bet. Okay, this is the last question we're going to take on the schools because we're going to have to move on to topics, but I have one more. Why are charter schools so popular in Jacksonville? Is it because people are trying to escape underfunded schools?
I think it's a very complicated question. I think there is a lot at work there. I think part of it is the physical infrastructure is ordinarily better, maybe not as extensive. A lot of charter schools don't have cafeterias or gyms, but they have clean, air-conditioned facilities. I think that's part of the motivation. I think some of the motivation is, I'm afraid we have not done a good job as a community telling the story of all the great things that happen in Duval County's public schools and how well they're doing compared to the national average and all of the headway that they've made. And that is a story that is impressive if you know it, but few know it. And so if you're in a position to pick something else, you may go with the old party line of our schools are terrible. Our schools are terrible. And there is some sense of school fatigue that people go, I'm sick of talking about our public schools. I want to do something else. And so there's that piece as well. There also is, and I'm just going to be completely honest, you can pick a charter school that has all kids that look and act like your kid. And I'm afraid that's at work as well.
Yeah, can I add something to that? Just a little anecdote. I had the privilege of serving on the Constitution Revision Commission in 2018. And at that time, up came a very serious charter school proposal for the Florida Constitution. And I'm wrestling with, at the time, and it must have been 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm on the phone with Gary Chartrand, whom I consider Jacksonville's charter school true spokesman. And I said, what do you think I ought to do? And he said, vote against it. And I said, you are telling me to vote against this? He said, absolutely. He said, what it will do is continue fueling these charter schools that feed off the perimeters of the core urban areas of the cities to make money. And they won't come in like Gary Chartrand and John Baker have done with KIPP School and
Right.
those type of charter schools where they're serving the inner city, they're serving the urban core, which is the areas Audrey says are where you don't look like us, right? But so Gary of all people said, no, don't support that. It's not going to help the school system in Florida. And I said, That's why I talked to him, I guess. But I mean, he was totally upfront about it, about what they were doing and what they were not doing.
Yeah, I think that it's fair to say that Hank and Audrey and I are not, none of us are opposed to charter schools. We were involved in this for the principle that the school board gets to run the schools in Jacksonville. Charter schools serve a lot of wonderful purposes. Some of them do, as Hank says, the ones that are run by good people like Gary and others. Others are less so, but you know, we were involved with this because of the principle that the school board gets to make decisions about how their funds are used and where their funds come from.
That's such an important point, Scott. That's exactly right. There was initial concern that each of us heard of from folks individually. Why are you against charter schools? And we were all really clear. That's not what we're about. We're not against charter schools. We are against shall means may, and we're against the city council's refusal to do the ministerial act of placing it on a ballot when they were legally required to do so.
And Elizabeth, can I go back to one thing? And just, this is sort of like the ending of all this, and that's the city council. I don't know if nobody reason anybody would remember that last city council meeting when they did approve it, but there were the same people who were hanging in there going, well, I'll vote for it because I have to, but I'm not sure I support this referendum to help the public schools. And the Florida Times-Union on the front page story the next day saying now the referendum's been approved, quoted the 5 people on the council who expressed these serious reservations about whether this was the right thing to do, and never once mentioned the council people who stood up and said, we desperately, as Audrey said, we desperately need this for Jacksonville. So that's the problem with the one paper town.
It is a problem with the one paper town, which perhaps takes us to JEA.
This is where the screams need to divide.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hank, you may need to do some disclosure about all the folks you represent in this.
I'm gonna go get a drink.
Yeah, it gets a little more complicated here.
I'll start with a simple thing and then Scott and Audrey can talk. I
Okay,
come from a school that way back whenever it was, the CEO of the JEA was removed, the board was replaced, and the decision was made not to sell the utility. Okay, that was done. That's ages ago. Now we are close to $2 million in legal fees to mess around with this whole thing, and I don't get it. Right? But I want Audrey and Scott to talk about, quote, the people's right to know.
So let me jump in on this one. If I was in trouble, I would hire Hank Cox. Let me just go on the record and say that. And any of you watching, if you've got legal trouble on the horizon, you should call Hank Cox because he's one hell of a lawyer. And he is currently representing several of the executives at JEA, and he's doing a hell of a job with them. So good for that. Good for that. Scott and I got involved in a different way. Many of you probably saw how Brenda Priestley Jackson and Randy DeFore were honored at the EVE Awards last week or 2 weeks ago now, and highlighted in the newspaper this weekend. They were really the individuals who began sounding the alarm, and this is a year ago, sounding the alarm, October 2019, saying, this is shenanigans, this isn't right. We've got to look inside this deal. This is all about selling JEA, and this is a train wreck coming. And we need people to start standing up and expressing that. And and there was no political gain in that, because it was a train at that point in time. It was a train that was hurtling down the tracks. And I can remember Nate Monroe writing an article that really resonated with me when he said, the city's donor class, the city's cocktail party sippers, the city's civic leaders aren't doing their job. They must stand up and start asking questions. And I tell you, I took that to heart. And Michael Ward agreed to convene a group that became Our Jacks. And you can find that at ourjacks.com. And the idea was to shine a very bright light on the facts of what was happening around JEA. And the other piece of it that I loved was we were also going to lift up the Brenda Priestley Jacksons and the Randy DeFores so they didn't feel like they were all alone and under attack. That we were going to lift them up and say, thank you for asking the hard questions. Thank you for getting to the truth. We've got your back. We're here for you. And I really like that strategy, because lots of times, we're all about shooting down politicians. Many times politicians deserve it, but rarely do the heroes get lifted up in a way where people can honestly say, wow, this took courage. Mm-hmm. And it did. And so I think Scott will agree with me that when we began meeting, that was when in-person meetings were allowed last October, November of 2019, and talking about a strategy for really getting to the truth in JEA, boom, all of a sudden things really started happening fast. And it was a real testament, I will say, number one, to we may be a one newspaper town, but boy, it did highlight the importance of journalism. That if we don't have journalists trying to seek out the truth and ferreting out the facts, you're really going to have a tough time having a truly democratic community. And so I was greatly appreciative of the work that they did. I think number two, we gave the city council members who were bold enough and brave enough to stand up and say, the backing where they felt like they had, wow, we're not alone here. We've got people that are behind us and pushing us and wanting to, which led to the investigative committee and led to the work that they've done. And that's still ongoing. But this was a new thing for Jacksonville, at least since I've lived here for 35 years. It was when a community comes together and says, hell no, things can happen. And I think it was empowering for a lot of people that they thought, I always thought in this town that if you go in the smoke-filled room, that's where the decisions are made, and there's nothing I can do to influence, so I might as well not try. This was an example of you can make a difference, and a collective body of people who stand together for what is right can make a difference. And I think about that a lot during this pandemic, because it's easy to get discouraged and feel sad and wonder what we're doing each day. I just figured out the other day it's October. But, you know, I mean, that was something where it was exciting to see people making a difference and believing they could and should make a difference. And very surprising to the people in the smoke-filled rooms who thought this was a done deal and get out of our way or we're going to run over you. It turned out the other way. Some of those people who thought they could run over the citizens of Jacksonville are now getting run over themselves.
A lot of information has come out about the JEA deal, and it's, as Audrey says, the public's involvement has been great, and the newspapers' involvement has been crucial. I still think there's some underlying issues that perhaps hopefully will still come out. And again, I mentioned the beginning bit of conspiracy theory. How can you have a political discussion without conspiracy theory? Some are right and some are wrong. But one of the ones that I've heard about this is that a number of factors underlying the motivation to sell JEA. One from the purchaser's side is that when you have utilities with large expenses, it's a huge benefit for them to expand their customer base so they can spread the costs over greater numbers. And a lot of utilities have spent a lot of money on nuclear that hasn't worked out so well. And the more people you have to share that cost, the better. So
Right.
There's motivation to get the Duval County a customer base in there. From the city side, we also have something that I think is not directly related to JEA, but maybe influencing it. And that is the continuing issue of the Police and Firemen Pension Fund balloon payments that are going to be coming up. That doesn't get talked about, but I think it's a huge issue for Jacksonville, that at some point, we're going to have to pay those costs. And, you know, whether you're for or against the JEA, the notion that you've got to find funding sources is not an unreasonable view. We've got to find the money somewhere, because that's going to be a huge issue for us. And I think those were two of the factors that led people to want to sell and people wanted to buy. None of that justifies the shenanigans that went on to try and get this through. But there are some underlying issues about that I think are important to continue to explore here.
Well, and I can remember being taken out to coffee by a JEA executive in the fall because they were aware that I was working with others to try to really get to the truth of what was happening. And they spent about 40 minutes talking to me about why this was a good idea. And at the end of that 40 minutes, I looked at this executive and I said, I don't know if it's a good idea to sell JEA. And I can't know because of all the lies and all of the cover up. I said, so there's no way for me to know the answer to that. There's no way for you to know the answer to that. I don't know what conversations you've been in, but this idea that we are going to just believe that it is okay after everything that has been done behind the scenes and all of the lying that is coming to light, I said, you know, there is not a way to have a reasonable discussion about this right now. The other piece of it is there is, you know, every mayor, the ones that I've worked for and the ones that I haven't, it's very exciting to think about having a lot of money to spend. It's very exciting because city budgets are always tight. And hopefully you run for mayor because you want to make great things happen and make change, which requires money. So the idea of being motivated by the fact that I'm going to have a couple $2 billion to spend during my term, it's highly motivating.
Audrey, when you first began with that speech, I was captivated till I saw you reach for that glass of wine.
Actually, I wish it was a glass of wine
Then
and
I-
water, but it is a wine glass. I
Yeah,
was
I'm the-
drinking wine earlier.
Yeah, and I'm the king of England.
Well,
You know, we're not going to accomplish anything by going toe to toe on this one. This does go back to the one paper town, for example, and I'll use your example, Audrey. If it fits the theme of the paper, they publish it. If it doesn't fit, they don't publish it. And if you have all your EVE Award winners, all of them, all these women who did remarkable things, right? Isn't it amazing that it's Randy DeFore and her companion on the committee, who are the two on the front page, and all the rest are buried in the back pages? Isn't that amazing? Those two, out of all those EVE Award winners. So there are a lot of people in this city who think that selling the JEA is an idea that had to have been considered, given the enormous dollars it would have brought in for the city. It wasn't a good or bad idea. It was one that should have been explored. And there are a ton of businessmen who still believe it should have been explored. And when they saw the numbers that it actually would have brought in from these different bidders, they said that was a good idea to check it out. It wasn't a bad idea to consider selling it. So I'm just.
That was flawed.
Huh?
The process was flawed.
Well, I come from the school innocent until proven guilty, not proven guilty by the Florida Times Union, that's for sure.
Which is why you should hire Hancock's.
Exactly.
But I mean, I'll give you an example. I've got a client that they wrote that she was in Washington, D.C. at a meeting with the investors who were being considered for the JEA purchase. Actually in Washington, D.C. She was in Mayo Clinic with an emergency appendectomy at the time. Did they write later that that was true? No, not at all. So, you know, it is what it is.
Well, so the referendum that's on the ballot this November to change the voting structure around the board, what are you thinking of that?
Mini school board, mini JEA board. Let the JEA board do their job. Let the city council do what they're supposed to be doing. Let the school board do what they're supposed to be doing. That's what I think.
I actually agree with that. I think it's what's the word I'm looking for? A superficial fix for something that if politicians do what they're supposed to do, you don't need to have that. I think that is one of the tools that this whole thing is just a reflection of how important it is to pay attention to who we elect. Mm-hmm. Because the mayors do have enormous power, and I think they should, to be able to appoint as needed citizens in our community who are smart, who are engaged, and place them on the independent authority boards. I don't have any problem with a mayor having that authority. Problem comes into play when that authority is abused.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I'll go back to Audrey, your point about, and we're like brother and sister. So when you get emotional about what a marvelous experience this has been in our community, that we've all risen up and, you know, we're so happy. Why doesn't that happen for the crime in this city, especially in the northwestern part of the city? Why didn't that happen when the school wanted to fund the programs? What is so magic about we all got to stop this thing, but the city council can't rise up and the civic council can't rise up on those other issues? What's so special about this? While the city dies in the northwestern quadrant, you know, the school system falls apart. Where are they on those?
Well, I think you're right. There does need to be more citizen engagement on those issues as well. But the problem is this one was something you could get your arms around. I think people believe that crime is unsolvable, which it's not. And that's just a whole nother conversation. But I think there's this fatigue in Jacksonville about crime. Well, that's unsolvable. I'm just going to have to shake my head and, you know, roll my eyes and live in a gated community, right? Because that's not something we can solve. We can solve it. And I wish we had the energy around that issue that we did around JEA, but there was enough momentum, enough information, and quite in fact, enough outrage that people did come together and you know, it was a special moment in time, no doubt about it. No doubt about it, but the circumstances were different. And I do believe, I've been here long enough. I can remember when they were thinking about canceling Friday night football, pre-pandemic, of course, and because of crime. And I thought, have we really gotten to that point in this community that we're going to cancel Friday night football because of crime? That just seems outrageously dumb to me. But I do wish we had that emotion on other issues. I agree with you on that.
And so
I'll just say, Audrey, you're a hero or a heroine if I believe and agree with you. If I don't agree with you, you're not my hero or my heroine. So,
Well,
you know, so
yeah.
everybody's got their heroes and their heroines.
That's right.
So,
Absolutely
what did you
right.
say? Okay.
So is our Jax basically, that was its job and it's over?
Yeah, so what's interesting is we've had conversations about that. Right now, the idea is, yes, let's see this to its conclusion. It's going to be a while before it is a conclusion. The government, the city council committee is still meeting. There's still investigations at the U.S. Attorney's Office that are still ongoing. So we are staying engaged on this issue. What happens after post JEA, we're not sure. But we're going to let it at least play out to its original conclusion over JEA.
Yeah, there are a lot of other issues that have gotten our attention, but whether it's Lot J or other things where lots of money is being spent. And our decision so far has been, we're not going to get involved in those. We're going to stay focused on the JEA until it's concluded. But it's a terrific group. I think we've got a lot of city leaders involved and over 500 people who are regularly paying attention to our website. So there are a lot of people who are looking at this, and there may be an occasion that it comes up again in the future. It's a good format, but right now that's not what we're doing. We don't want to dilute our efforts.
I was invited to join.
Yes, you were. I invited you.
I was invited to join.
I invited you too. He'll still come.
Eventually.
That's right.
We've got one question, someone saying, what is the impact of the whole JEA issue and other indications of city government corruption? What do you think that will do to the next mayoral election?
Audrey's a politician.
Well, I do think that there is a terrible distrust of government right now. There's always generally a sort of a healthy distrust that I kind of admire. And people, especially in Jacksonville, kind of do that. We got to earn my trust, and that's fair as well. But the level of distrust right now is the highest that I've ever seen it. And that's why you see things like when the Lot J proposal comes out, Channel 4 did a poll, 77% of people said, no way, don't do it. And I think it's simply because people are going, so you're telling me this, I'm not sure I believe you. I'm not sure you're going to spend the money the way you say you're going to spend it. And you've got to earn my trust or re-earn it. And that's a tough situation for any elected official to be in. And we are not, Mayor Curry's term is not done. He is just 2 years in. He's got half his term left. And so there's hopefully good things that can happen, but the level of distrust right now is great. And I think you're going to see the candidates in the next election talk a lot about how to rebuild trust. At least that's what I'm hearing.
You think that's just local, Audrey?
I'm afraid it's not. But the local politics is what I care about.
Not me right now. Maybe in about a month I might.
Yeah. Well, let's move, speaking of voting, to the ex-felons. Is it over? Have we just lost and now we just raise money to pay the fines?
Well, the dates to register to vote have passed.
Yes.
So I think it is over for right now.
Well, I think you're right, Scott, although today in Tallahassee, U.S. District Court Judge Mark Walker entered some orders and did it in a way to expedite the United States Court of Appeals for immediate review of extending the deadline for registration on this stuff. Okay, and of course that is directly tied to the felons being able to vote, ex-felons, excuse me. I'll just say, and I know Audrey and I have talked about this before, back on the Constitutional Revision Commission, we heard testimony, extensive testimony from the administration in Tallahassee on the restoration of voting rights. And it was absolutely the most embarrassing process in the entire nation, what they were doing, and they still do over there. They would have I think it was 60 a quarter they'd undertake. I can't remember the exact numbers, 60 people, that'd be 240 a year. There would be, you'd have to wait between 5 and 9 years before you could even be considered after the termination of your sentence. And I can't remember, something like 29,000 on the shelves waiting to be heard. And they didn't care. They just didn't care about that because these were felons. So who cares? And we had come up with a recommendation to put on the ballot something that was very similar to the one that ended up being on the ballot that the Citizens Petition Initiative did. And so we backed off because we were scared that if we put both of them on the ballot, the voters would be confused. And, well, I don't know which one to vote for. They're so similar. So we pulled ours back. And then the other one did pass. And then it got gutted by the current administration in Tallahassee.
Yep.
With the legislature where they say, oh, got to pay the cost too, got to pay the fine. And they found a way to stop it. And they were very successful at it. And now with the efforts for other people to come in and help people pay the fines and the cost, it just took too long. They've got issues in some counties where people can't even find out how much they owe anyway. So,
well, that's actually a question that had just come up. How can anyone claim they can't vote until they pay their fees when we can't tell them what their fees are? I mean,
that's your government. Ask your government that question. If your government doesn't want more people voting, ask them why they make it hard.
Right.
But so for those of us, and this was a particular interest of our group, we signed petitions and ran around trying to get it on the ballot, and we're all excited when it passed. And I assume this just means we have to, well, elect a different legislature and go back to the drawing board again. And in the meantime, raise money to pay the fines. But legally speaking, it's over until.
It is this ballot. It is election. I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's a raise money to pay the fines now since it's over. I think consideration should be, you got enough signatures on that first petition. Do another petition that says fines and costs are not part of the voting rights process. Do it that way. Put it back on the ballot and say, okay.
That's assuming we can defeat the ballot measure about how we have to pass everything twice.
Yeah.
I sent Scott and Audrey earlier, and I don't mean to dominate this part of it, some materials. But on the proposal that's on the ballot that you got to vote twice, 2 years apart, still requires 60% of the vote in each one. And what did they call it? The clean something? But anyway, if you look at the campaign numbers for that particular proposal, it is almost $9 million have been contributed in in-kind contributions to get that to pass. Now, to me, that's just designed to keep the public from participating in the democracy.
Of course.
You got to approve a constitutional amendment by 60% and then do it again 2 years later by 60%. What's the point of that unless you don't want the people participating? So.
And how does that pass the Supreme Court's?
Well, I think Scott and Audrey both, I think the two tests the Supreme Court, is it misleading? And is the summary 67 words or less or something?
That's it.